as a political scientist, and one perhaps not in the greatest favor of the man on my right, I'd like to talk about the differences between political science and economics when it comes to competition, because one of the main differences is the way that economics and political science view competition and its outcomes. Economics, competition within the market under fair rules, supposedly reveals merit. In political science, is a very different view. Essentially what it is, it's seen much more as a thinly veiled attempt at dominance. And so you have a very different consideration of the outcome. In my opinion, and clearly that of Professor Lincoln, the nature of international competition is changing. Among developed nations, which he's been talking about this afternoon, military confrontation has fallen away a great deal, and economic competition has risen a great deal. And I'd like to give you just a quick example of that. The most recent significant military confrontation that has been seen is the 2003 Iraq War. But the disparity between the combatants was quite considerable. In 2003, the U.S. military budget was $276.7 billion. The Iraqi military budget was $1.3 billion. So that's the military side. On the economic side, within the last year, the United States has had some considerable difficulties and challenges with the Chinese government and the Chinese economy. However, when you look at the size of the two economies in purchasing power parities, the U.S. economy is $13.9 trillion, and the Chinese economy is $7 trillion. So as you can see, there's a very big difference in the competitions, the international competitions we're beginning to see. On the economic side, where the parity seems to be greater than there is on the military side for the moment. So, economics has clearly become a key realm where international competition between major countries is being resolved. A few points. First, Professor Lincoln in his book describes the rising importance of Japan and China as key economic actors, and I couldn't agree more. In certain ways, I consider China as Japan 2.0, a major economy in Asia, driven by export-led growth, with increasing foreign exchange reserves making a huge impact on the global economy, coupled with an unprecedented economy of scale. Now, a key difference is, of course, that China has considerable nuclear military capacity and Japan does not. I had several other things I was going to talk about, but since he covered them, half my talk is gone. But then that'll take me to my last point, pretty much, which is there are those terrible moments when war becomes economics by other means. The natures of war have changed over time. We've heard about wars over property. But then they have become primarily, wars of succession, such as the 100 Years' War. And then wars of ideology, such as the Crusades, or the 30 Years' War, or, of course, the Cold War. And finally, and more recently, we begin to see the revival of wars over commodities, such as the Iraq-Kuwait War. Ironically, Russia lost a war of ideology, the Cold War, and now is in some sense winning an economic contest with the European Union by holding the EU hostage over its control over oil and natural gas. Now, this raises the question of the economics of supply and demand. Economics holds that if the supply of something valuable is limited, the price will go up. But if the supply in question is important enough in international politics, often it isn't resolved in the boardroom. Occasionally, it's resolved on the battlefield. In these cases, countries have gone to war to control these commodities. So you could say that, as I said, war has been economics by other means. There have been several specific cases. There's been wars over oil, natural gas, and one interesting one is wars over nutmeg. Now, I bet most of you don't know why I talk about nutmeg, but 400 years ago, a single bag of nutmeg could provide a life of prosperity for someone because you could only grow nutmeg in 10 islands around Indonesia. So in 1665, 1666, the British and the Dutch fought these tremendous wars over control of these 10 islands. And in 1667, they signed a treaty, the Treaty of Breda, where the British said, okay, you can have all 10 islands. And in return, the British received control of a different island. And we're sitting on that island. It's the island of Manhattan. So there is a moment when you consider that wars over commodities 400 years ago were incredibly relevant, and relatively relevant for the event we're having today. And also, to some extent, there are other wars of commodities continuing today, of course, Iraq, Kuwait, and the general region. Now, finally, I'd like to pick up a reference to Sir Norman Angell that we've heard about a little earlier. He wrote The Great Illusion. After he wrote this book, he was elected to Parliament in Britain in 1929, and in 1933 he won the Nobel Prize. But the policy implications of his work were ignored by the government of the day. Now, I find it very ironic that someone could leave elected office, win the Nobel Prize, and then at the same time have his work be completely ignored by the government of the day. But I'm sure that'll never happen again. Thank you very much.